had an affair with my next-door neighbor until he recognized my loud noises and paid a visit. This is a crazy thing that happened, and I honestly don't know where to start to tell it, but I'll try and explain it for you guys as best as I can so you can understand. Hi, Redditors, I'm Rebecca and I'm 30, but I don't really look it. I'm actually the quiet, gentle type, and I'm happily married, well, formerly happily married, with 2 beautiful children, and my husband's name is Augustus. This is sort of a confession, and I'm sure a lot of people will see this, but let's carry on. So I've been married to my husband for around 7 years or so, and as is a norm, married life wasn't always a bed of roses, contrary to how the initial first years of marriage looked like. We were great. The affection, the intimacy, the love, all of it was just perfect in my eyes, and we were like a well-oiled machine until we weren't. I don't know if it was from the work stress or the stress of raising the children as they grew, but cracks started to appear in the marriage, and with me being sort of a pacifist to a certain degree, I tried to think up ways to make it better, to fix everything so we didn't drift apart, as my instincts told me we were on the verge of. I didn't know if it was something that I was doing wrong on my part that was causing issues, so I tried making up for it. See, I'm a corporate wife, so I've got an office job like my husband, and I still wanted to make things better. So I woke up earlier to make better breakfast for my husband than just toast and eggs and bacon, and to make enough to pack some up for him to have during lunch breaks. This worked to a degree because the atmosphere started to look better. I had to make sure it did so nothing affected the kids, who were rarely with us since they attended a nice school back in my mother-in-law's city, whenever they came for the weekends or holidays. Now the morning routine started to look better somewhat, except for the draining on my part, and it was worth the stress. But night was another issue. My husband was staying out more, spending later hours at work, and coming home so exhausted all he could do was grunt out a greeting, eat whatever I had made, take a quick shower, and collapse on the bed to grunt a good night before passing out, only to repeat it all again the next day. Sometimes he even slept in the office too. I was frustrated and I was lost. I was getting angry that my efforts were literally wasted, so I decided to give him a piece of his own medicine and see how he liked coming home to me asleep, or giving him the cold shoulder. It was a Friday. I could never forget it, no matter how I tried. I didn't have to work late hours at the office, so I decided to bust out my party dress from the very back of my wardrobe and go out for some fun. I had every intention of drinking and dancing the night away since the kids weren't coming home that weekend, and it was supposed to be just like that if not for one small variable. The club was one of the nicer ones in the city, sort of high-end without the smell of drugs and lung-clogging smoke, and there were no teens dry humping each other on the dance floor, grinding to dirty bass drop beats, and I liked it that way. I slid onto a seat at the bar and signaled to a bartender to order a drink that was quickly made for me, and I sat there nursing my glass as I watched the club-goers have fun. The music was thumping, but only to a nice degree, and it was just the way I liked it. To this day, I still feel like I should have gone home earlier, say around 8 or 9, but I just had to stay up till 9:30, and that's when he walked in. Tall, dark, and handsome, with all hard-cut muscles and sharp curves, and exactly my type. Like my husband before the permanent indifferent look on his face that was sort of a resting face. But this man was all smirks and toothy grins and hearty laughs that frankly sounded too nice. I waved to the bartender and requested another drink to wash away the evil thoughts and comparisons in my head, because I was already imagining those flirtatious looks thrown my way, and those strong-looking arms gripping my waist and thighs and spreading. I was knocking back my drink so quickly it slightly burnt as it went down. My throat sort of amplified, and I fought a sputter which I disguised as clearing my throat and signaling the bartender for a refill, but with something sweeter than the last one. I could feel embarrassment heating up my skin as I prayed to any and every deity that the fine piece of man close to the other end of the bar didn't take notice. Didn't notice me at all, even. Deep down, I wanted him to look at me, and I know this. I sighed, sipping my drink slowly till the sound of the bar stool beside me scraping the floor registered in my head, and I snapped my head quickly to look at my side, and I found the handsome man sitting beside me with a polite smile across his features, not the seductive smirk he'd given waitresses earlier, and my gut sort of twisted at that, but I swallowed down the feeling. Now this is where the actual problems began. We got talking, taking turns ordering more drinks and laughing at jokes and snickering at stories and similarities in our daily lives. And I know I'm reeling in, letting him reel me in. Yeah. He said his name was Frederick, but I could call him Freddie, and I gave my name. He asked me if I'm single, just as our talk and body language started to get heated and against my better judgment, something I like to blame on the alcohol and the stress from home and work. I opened my mouth and the words, "Yes, I'm single," spilled from my suddenly dry, liquor-stained lips, and my heart jumped in my chest, but I quickly stumped it down as well as the guilt churning in my stomach like bile. But then he placed a hand on my pant-covered thigh and gave a gentle squeeze as he looked me in the eye, giving me the most tender of looks and smiles, and I knew I was gone and right into him. I don't know when or how we stumbled and staggered out of the club and landed in a nice hotel not too far from the club, and we were sharing very deep kisses, French kissing as we shed our clothes at the foot of the bed. He was surprisingly gentle and tender with me, holding me tight and fondling me just right. I realized that I've been neglecting my own needs for so long to save my marriage. I've been touch-starved and neglected for so long, and I was crying as he held me, and he just shushed me gently with soft kisses across my face as he drove deep inside of me. The encounter wasn't just a quick lay or mindless coupling, no. It was more like lovemaking, so gentle, so tender, like he was holding a lover he shared a deep bond with, and I knew I was gone. It was wrong, but it felt so right, especially after months of denial and starvation. I had never been more aroused in my life. I woke up the next morning to find myself cocooned in strong arms and a solid chest against my front. My thighs were over his hip, and I think I might have moved a bit because the grip on those arms got tighter, and I was pressed closer into his chest. I could barely hold back from crying again as I wondered the last time I had woken up like this, held so lovingly and cradled like I was something precious. He greeted me in a gruff, sleepy voice as he kissed my forehead and squeezed my middle some more. I wanted to stay wrapped up in his arms some more, but then I remembered I'd have to get home and take care of the house. I told him I had to go back home, and he offered to give me a lift, but I declined, saying that would be moving too quickly as I hopped in the shower and cleaned up. He watched me get dressed and put my hair back up in a bun, and I actually couldn't resist the urge to give him a kiss on the cheek as I left. I took a taxi home, and to my great relief, I saw that my husband wasn't home, and there was a text on my phone that read that he'd gone on a business trip for the weekend and would be back home on Monday. I didn't know if it was luck or if it was a prelude to what karma had in store for me, but I was so grateful I didn't have to explain my movements to my husband, and I bounded up the stairs with the intention to soak in a tub of hot water to relax my aching muscles, as I was still a bit achy from the previous night since I hadn't been handled so well in a long time. When Monday came and my husband got home from his work trip in the evening, he was in a surprisingly good mood, engaging in a conversation with me, asking me about work and my weekend, which was been spent texting with Frederick over a chilled glass of champagne as I giggled like a teenage girl again. But I couldn't tell him that, so I simply go with scrolling through my Pinterest and Instagram over a glass of wine because I was bored. He was happy for some reason and wanted to go out on a date during the coming weekend, and we ended the night with passionate lovemaking that was nearly as good as when Frederick held me. I don't know when sleep claimed me or how my day went the following day, but I do know that I was in a daze after he pulled out of me and pulled me close to his chest to press kisses and murmur, "I love yous," into my hair. The days flew by with my husband and I sort of rekindling the flame to a certain extent. Although there was still that underlying coldness in my husband, but I didn't mind it since the affection and attention were coming back. It was a little bit, but it was better than the dry spell, and it was nicer in the bedroom too. If he could, he'd hold me into the night. But we didn't go on the date till around 2 weeks later because he had to go on another trip, and I found myself out of the house again, but not to the club this time with Frederick. It was a quiet restaurant downtown with an ambient atmosphere that made it romantic, like he was trying to court me or something, but I brushed it off, writing it off as just me overthinking things and that he was just being a gentleman, wanting to treat me to dinner. I didn't even dare ask what we were or where our relationship would be leading to or what. It was like I was a teenager again on our first date because Frederick was such a gentleman and was so polite and kind, but long story short, we fell into bed again, and this time he was even more tender, if that was possible. He took his time to open me up on his tongue, working me up to the peak and just leaving me there for a good hour before he finally let me finish, and I came crashing down so hard I let out a scream of pleasure, and my vision went wide for a second before he descended on me and finished his business. He waited a minute for me to adjust before he began to rock in and out of me gently, and I'm wrapping my arms and legs around him like a baby koala while he kissed down my neck and whispered sweet nothings in my ears. We came down from our highs and decided to take a bath together, but ended up continuing from where we stopped, and it was pure bliss. We enjoyed some champagne in the tub, and then we fell asleep in each other's arms till morning again, and it was time for me to go back home on Saturday morning. This time I was not so lucky, and my husband came home that same Saturday, but in the evening we ordered takeout and had a passionate night, which I frankly enjoyed a little bit too much because my body was already so relaxed from my Friday escapades, and I could proudly say that breaking my back was worth all the pleasure and bliss. It was an amazing weekend, and my husband reminded me of our date again, and my heart skipped a beat, hoping he didn't choose the same restaurant that Frederick had taken me to on Friday. I tried to play smart and asked my husband where he had in mind for our date, and he said it would have to be a surprise, and I laughed, to cover up my panic, my increased heart rate. My laughter caused him to chuckle and sigh before he turned to switch the bedside lamp off and turned back to hug me tight as we slept. I spent the night and morning overthinking, and it's safe to say that my week was an absolute mess, with me imagining every possible nasty scenario that would cause my husband to find out about my adventures. And I knew I'd be in some serious troubles, but the regular messages from Frederick, checking up on me and asking me about work and my days, helped to calm me down somewhat whenever I was straying too much on the edge of panic attacks. Did I mention that he also sent me poems? I had no idea if he copied them off the internet or if he composed and wrote them himself, but the thought alone was enough to make me swoon and get me going when I was sinking too deep in my head. This man had it all: the looks, the sensitivity, giving affection, and even bedroom skills. And now he knew just how to lift my spirits and put me in a better mood. The weekend approached, just 2 days to go, and I was already so dependent on Frederick to keep me calm as I went about my days at work and at home. And we'd even scheduled another date by the next month to, as he'd put it, get to know each other some more. And it made me very happy and gave me more to look forward to than the date with my husband. It was finally D-Day, and I was still somewhat shaking in my boots like a newborn lamb. But I think I did a good job hiding my discomfort because my husband couldn't tell that anything was amiss at all, so we carried on as usual. It was a Saturday, so we stayed home. I made a nice breakfast, which we downed with juice, and we spent the whole day just doing mundane things like watching TV and actually playing cards and chess, all while he constantly checked his phone and replied to texts lightning fast. Reservation and dinner plans, he'd explained, and I kept up my charade of a calm, anticipating wife. Time for our dinner date rolled by, and I was surprised with a new dress and heels in the bedroom while I was taking a shower and still thinking of what to wear. Since I'd been so tense all week, I wasn't even in the mood for dressing nicely. I had wanted to go with a simple look, but at this sight of the clothes laid out on the bed for me, my heart broke, and I slapped myself internally for trying to ruin my husband's efforts because of my own anxiety and sins. So I decided to suck it up and get into gear, changing my looks to fit the beauty of the dress he'd gifted me, and I was dressed in record time compared to the usual time I spend, well, women spend, on getting ready. Augustus, my husband, was dressed in a navy blue suit, and he'd gifted me a silver dress with a daring slit that went a little bit past my mid-thigh, and the look of awe on his face made me feel power, I won't lie, and I took his outstretched hand as we walked outside to the car. Little did I know, I'd been seen getting into the car with my husband by none other than Frederick, who had been in my neighborhood for some reason. The restaurant had in fact not been the one Frederick and I had gone to, and a perceptive person could have seen all the tension evaporate from my body as my shoulders visibly relaxed and my smile turned brighter as I took in the romantic scene in front of me while my husband led me in. It was as if Augustus had been taking lessons from Frederick because he was a completely different man here, his usual polite nature seemingly intensified and made him the perfect gentleman. Just as we made it to our reserved booth and had our orders brought to us, my husband cleared his throat and dropped a bombshell. It had been our wedding anniversary, and that had been why he postponed our previous date and agreed to go on the business trip rather than a certain colleague of his, and he ended this by giving me a small velvet-covered box. I opened it to find a watch, a bracelet, and a beautiful necklace, all of which were silver, and I couldn't help but be touched that he still remembered that my favorite choice of jewelry, if I ever wore any, was silver, and I can hardly resist leaning over the table to kiss him smack on the lips. I didn't remember that it was our anniversary today with all the tension. I had thought it was the following week, and I made up a lie and told him that I had also gotten him a gift too, but he'd be getting his later, at home. The night dragged on, and we exchanged light conversations after dinner over glasses of wine and dessert until it was time to go back home, so we left for home. The night was wonderful, and we ended it at a nice hotel just a few blocks away from where we'd had dinner, and we also had a reserved room, the penthouse suite at the top floor of the hotel. We had a passionate night, and I cried because the lovemaking was wonderful, and because I couldn't believe I had been so stressed out over a beautiful day, and my husband kept shushing me gently and stroking me to calm me down as I whimpered and moaned. Did I ever mention that I was actually sort of loud in bed? Well, I'm pretty loud, and it's something my husband was completely okay with, just as much as Frederick was. So our night carried on into Saturday with my husband having a romantic bath ready for us in the morning, room service apparently, with rose petals and champagne and more intimate sessions in the bath, and I was pleasantly loose by the time we made our way home on Sunday afternoon. I couldn't even get to the kitchen to make anything for us, and my husband simply suggested that we get pizza and takeout again, but I was hungry for something more, and we ended up getting naked there on the couch after we had our meal. He took me hard and fast, hitting all of my sweet spots, and I was screaming in ecstasy, completely forgetting that our bedroom had any form of soundproofing, but it felt so good to just let go once in a while. My phone made a ding sound, but I ignored it, even ignoring a few calls which my husband urged me to pick up, but I was more content with laying in his arms than moving to pick up the phone, and the day ended at last. Monday rolled in, and while my husband was perfectly fine and relaxed, I had to call in sick at work, and my husband laughed at my pouting face as he left for work, and I followed him out the front door dressed in a simple bathrobe to give him a customary goodbye kiss, and he was speeding off to work while I set about cleaning up the house and making lunch for myself and take a nice shower. There was a knock on the door a few hours after my husband had left for work that startled me because I knew I wasn't expecting anyone or anything. I thought it was a delivery, so I decided to just keep my bathrobe on as I answered the door since the bathrobe was quite modest. The sight of a familiar face at the door nearly made me faint, but I quickly schooled my expression and calmed my racing heart so I could face him properly. We exchanged greetings somewhat coldly as he leaned on the doorframe and simply stared, observing me as I fought the urge to squirm under his gaze. I tried to play it cool and invited him inside, a mistake actually, but I didn't want the neighbors to see our exchange. He asked how my weekend went, and I gave a nervous laugh, telling him it was splendid, and he responded with a raised brow, then went straight for the kill. He said he'd seen me and with my husband, but from the way he spoke, I was certain he didn't know I was married, and I sneak a glance downwards like I'm looking at my slipper-clad feet, but I'm actually checking to see if I still had my wedding ring on, which I gratefully didn't. I told him that I had a prior engagement, simplifying and saying I had dinner with a friend, and Frederick chuckled at this. He said I was pretty loud and I made such pretty noises. There was a smirk on his face, and I felt my face heating up in embarrassment as the activities of the previous night flashed before my eyes, and I nearly missed the meaning of his words, but then they hit me. Frederick had heard me last night, my neighbors had heard me last night. Frederick was my neighbor. My eyes went wide as the information sank in, and Frederick was full on laughing at me. Not a cold laugh, but an actual hearty sound straight from his belly, and it did things to my stomach and chest. He said he couldn't believe his beautiful angel was actually his neighbor, and she let someone else touch her. He said the last part in a cold, hard voice that honestly scared me, but I refused to back down, using simple logic that would have made sense if I wasn't a married woman. I told him that we weren't exclusive, talk more of an actual item, so I had the right to have another partner, especially one that is ready to put a proper label on the relationship. My arms were crossed over my chest as I tried to mirror his cold expression, and he was slightly taken aback before quickly recovering and nodding his head as he let my words sink in. He said I was right and he should have been more understanding and specific. His voice was still hard as he stood up from the couch, stretching to his full height, but I didn't shrink back even though I desperately wanted to, should have. He was ducking his head and putting his lips against mine and deepening the kiss. He poured all his feelings into the kiss. He said he was going to make it up to me on our next date. He sounded apologetic after he broke the kiss and stepped back to leave. I just stood there, speechless and in a daze as he closed the door behind him when he left the house. But I'm scrambling to catch myself and recover from the shock enough to dash towards the door and poke my head through enough to see him unlock the door of the house next door right beside mine. He turned towards my house and gave me a smirk filled with so many promises, then he went in. Frederick and I continued to chat and meet up once in a while, and we often waved at each other when we saw each other in the neighborhood, and my husband raised his hackles at this, but I quickly calmed him down by saying I had bumped into the new neighbor one time when he'd been on a trip, and he'd given me a lift to the house as a kind gesture to try and get to know his neighbors. I also said that I'd also given him a bottle of wine as a welcome, so we were on sort of friendly terms, and my husband trusted me enough to reel in his jealousy and believe me. I had another reason to panic when my husband walked up to Frederick's house one evening to say hello. He had told me, and I fought down the urge to stop him, lest he think there was something more than friendly neighbor relationship going on. But I rested easy when my husband insisted that I go with him to say hi. Frederick was civil and welcoming, and his hand lingered in mine when we shook hands. No one said anything more, but we didn't go in, as we'd only come over to say hello and we were gone. More like, I sort of pulled my husband back home and kissed him senseless to distract him, and we ended up making love that night. But all I could see as we got down to it was Frederick watching us as we rocked against each other on the bed, that knowing smirk on his face as he watched us. Me and I moaned louder than normal. Frederick insisted that we go on more dates so he could turn my heart away from my other partner, as he didn't know Augustus was my husband, and make me fall in love with him more, and I went along with it. The thrill was just too good to turn down just yet. Frederick and I had a date planned out for a Sunday afternoon outside of town, just for a change in scenery, he had said, and I agreed to it, telling my husband that I was meeting up with an old classmate and that I'd be back by Monday. I teased him not to miss me too much as I kissed him goodbye and left. Even after our little mishap at the time, I found out he was my neighbor. When he held me in the evening after our little sightseeing date, he still took me gently, still made love to me, and didn't channel the anger and jealousy no doubt felt into our bedroom activities. Instead, he insisted that we talk it out even though we weren't exclusive yet, and I found myself starting to somewhat fall for this man a little, and I was conflicted. I loved my husband and the kids, but at the same time I had needs. Needs that Frederick knew about, knew how to satisfy, and it made me bitter and happy all at once. Happy that someone understood, but bitter because my moral compass was still somewhat functional, and it could very well tell that what I was doing was far from right, but I just couldn't help it. I couldn't stop, at least until I was caught or close to getting caught. And I had no idea how close I was to actually getting caught, but it was getting far too thrilling to stop just yet, and I enjoyed it a little too much. Before I knew it, I was lying to my husband frequently to go out on dates and have sexual escapades with an unfairly attractive man who was too talented in the art of pleasing a woman's body and heart. Going on trips almost every month for 4 months straight and going on dates almost every 2 weeks for another 3 months, and it was like I had begun to live my best life, going out of town to other cities and even abroad, to another country for a week once, after calling in a favor at work, and my husband was none the wiser until he actually became suspicious. I think what started to give it away wasn't even my frequent outings, because he felt that I deserved to get out once in a while like he did, and I didn't complain, so he had no right to complain. Augustus began to suspect the expensive things I often came home with from my trips and outings, things for myself and some for the kids and also him sometimes, but he didn't want to say anything because I've never given him a reason to doubt me before, but that started to change as the months went by. 6 months or so into my little affair with Frederick, my husband became more suspicious, and we started to argue more at home, and I'd just leave the house angry, sometimes to my parents, or I'd call Frederick out, and it was probably because I was getting careless and I wasn't covering up my tracks properly anymore. I didn't even stack up my excuses to stay out late like before, and it irked my husband. I was only around on random weekends, and if the kids were coming home, then I'd be out getting all sorts of gifts and toys and snacks for them, and Frederick, ever understanding, accepted the fact that I had kids so easily that he asked to meet them sometime. But I had to decline because I didn't want the kids giving away my marital status that I'd lied about initially. But that didn't stop Frederick from, as he put it, trying to get on the children's good side, and it warmed my heart. It all came to a head when my husband actually put tails on me, people monitoring my moves, and the day it all came crashing down was the day, a Sunday evening, when my husband saw me walking out of a high-class hotel, arm in arm with none other than our next-door neighbor after getting a tip from one of the tails he put on me. Augustus was mature enough to avoid causing a scene there at the hotel lobby, and instead went home to wait for me while I'd gone shopping before going back home. I got home to find all the lights off and my husband sitting in the dark in the living room. The way he sounded so cold and looked so angry as he switched on the floor lamp beside him terrified him, but I stood my ground as he questioned me. He asked me where I'd been, and I simply replied that I'd been out for some fun, and he scoffed at that, mimicking my tone but mocking. And he asked if my fun involved hopping in and out of hotels and resorts with men. It was my turn to get angry as well, but I was quickly shut up when he tossed a file on the coffee table and calmly told me to open it. My eyes went wide as I pulled out the contents of the file, stifling a gasp at the sight of multiple pictures and handwritten notes, depicting almost all of my movements and activities in the past month. At the back of everything was a set of familiar documents, already half-signed with certain designated areas filled with the familiar scrawl that was my husband's handwriting. I was panicking, and I blurted out the fact that I was hurt that he put a tail on me, and that seemed to enrage my husband the more because he looked up at me, after keeping his head down while I went through the file, and I saw tears in his eyes as he spoke to me, and he asked if putting tails on me hurt as much as finding out that his wife and the mother of his children was outside frolicking with men, and I started to cry too. I didn't know when I dropped to my knees and began to sob and hiccup out apologies that landed on deaf ears. Augustus ignored my pleas in favor of asking me if I had just one partner, and at this point, I knew it wouldn't do anything to lie as it was all out in the open. So I answered that I only had one partner, and I added that we'd always use protection, and I can see relief sliding over his features for a brief second before it was gone. I could tell that he was blaming himself, but at the same time, he needed someone else to shoulder more blame. He suddenly stood up and told me to hand him the papers by tomorrow evening with my side of it signed accordingly. There was no room for argument or negotiating or even an explanation of sorts, and I broke down right there in the living room and cried till dawn. I didn't see my husband when he left for work, but I picked myself up and headed out as well, the divorce papers burning a hole in my bag as I set out. I saw Frederick on my way out, but I couldn't respond to his waving or his text and calls. I somehow managed to get the papers signed, but that was by Wednesday, as I was stuck in a daze from Sunday night, all through till Wednesday night when I handed him the papers in tears, but he didn't acknowledge my tears, simply taking the papers and placing them in the bedside table. I cried for him to join me in the master bedroom, even if just for one night, one last time. But he looked at me with so much disgust that I shrank back immediately and scrambled to leave the room on wobbly legs. As I laid in bed later that night, sleep eluding me, I cried harder, silently, once more recognizing the truth that I had ruined my marriage all for pleasure and thrills, and I regretted every bit of it. I dreaded facing my husband in court for child custody, but I knew I'd have to get it over with. Even though I was given custody of one child or neither of the kids, I'd still do my best to support them as their mother. Update. I lost the child custody as expected, as there was no way Augustus would let me keep any of the kids with me, and the court ruled that I'd be allowed periodic visits and other visits if the children wanted it. I found out that Frederick knew what was happening all along, as in, he knew I was married, but he still played along, and he told me as much, saying that he was waiting for me to fess up, but decided to keep mute about it when I still didn't come clean. Of course, I don't blame him since I was too busy dealing with my own issues. My husband wanted to leave the house, but I told him not to, since the children had memories in the house and neighborhood, so I opted to move out instead, to a small place close to my workplace. I also found out that Frederick was actually married with 3 kids, and he had basically been stringing me along, knowing I was married but still treating me so well because his wife worked abroad, and his children were with his parents, sort of like mine were with Augustus's mother. This came to light when a few months after my thankfully clean divorce, I was coming to my former neighborhood to see my kids one weekend since their father wasn't home and they were lonely. I saw a different car parked in the driveway, and I saw Frederick come out to greet the woman who had come down from the car with 3 children that bore striking resemblance to Frederick. He kissed her deeply as my eyes widened, and his eyes met mine, but the glare he sent my way had shivers running down my spine. It's not like I was the only guilty one here, but sadly, I was the one and only culprit in the whole infidelity thing, and his innocent wife was none the wiser. I thought about tracking his wife down and coming clean to her, mostly out of spite, and out of a demonic reasoning that he also deserved the pain I had gone through, and was still going through. But I dismissed the thought. I accepted that it was my cross to bear, and it wasn't his business being a part of it, and neither should an innocent woman suffer for something that I could have avoided. I should have done my best to keep this from happening. I'm just happy that although I don't have full custody of my children, I'm still allowed to visit them and assist in their upbringing. Though I doubt I'm any sort of model mother, I'm still determined to do my best. I'm still single and have no intention of getting into any relationship, as I'm content with helping and raising my 2 children. If I could go back to the day I met Frederick and change everything, I would. But now I lost my husband and my kids partially. I can't change anything, and I brought this upon myself.